Morning drifts into the Starbucks in Peoria, Arizona, and I sit alone with a cooling cup and a folder that could end a marriage. 4 years ago, I said I'd stand beside Melissa and her son Brandon. Yet today I hold proof of what he did while she chose not to see me. She expects an apology, a lowered head, a man begging for his place back. But I came here with one quiet question burning in my chest. When did his lies outweigh the life I gave us? Her answer will draw the line between my past and whatever future I have left. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. Tom Grady stood in his driveway. The Arizona morning sun beat down on his shoulders. His clothes rained from the second-floor window above. A blue work shirt landed on the concrete, then his reading glasses case. His blood pressure pills scattered across the pavement like tiny white stones. "Get out!" Melissa screamed from the window. "You're dangerous. This is my house now." 10 minutes earlier, Tom had been brewing decaf coffee, the familiar ritual of morning pills. Cholesterol medication lined up next to his vitamins. The quiet routine of a 62-year-old retired mechanic. Now he clutched a trash bag in one hand, his good sports coat in the other, his whole life reduced to what he could carry. At the window, Brandon wrapped his arm around his mother's shoulders. The 17-year-old boy looked down at Tom with cold satisfaction. To neighbors walking their dogs, it looked protective, a brave son shielding his frightened mother. But Tom caught something else in the boy's eyes, a flash of victory. "I've seen enough," Melissa's voice cracked. "Brandon finally told me the truth about how you act when I'm not home." Each word hit Tom like a physical blow. She never asked him what truth she meant, never paused to hear his side. Tom kept his voice steady. "Melissa, I've never raised my voice at your son. Not once." "Liar," she pointed toward the street. "Leave now or I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you hurt a minor." Tom's hands shook as he loaded his suitcase into the aging Ford. His back ached from years of crawling under airplane engines. His pride ached worse. This ranch-style house had been his dream. He remembered rewiring the electrical system himself, installing grab bars in the bathroom, widening doorways so they could grow old here safely together. Brandon pulled the curtain aside, just enough to give Tom a tiny smirk. Then he disappeared. In that half-second, Tom understood. This wasn't teenage drama. This wasn't a misunderstanding about discipline or household rules. This was a performance. A neighbor across the street slowed his morning walk. The man pretended to check his smartwatch while watching the scene unfold. Tom felt his face burn with humiliation. He was the friendly retiree everyone waved to, the guy who helped jumpstart dead batteries and brought in mail during vacations. Now he was the dangerous man being thrown out of his own home. As Tom pulled away from the curb, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The stucco house with its orange desert landscaping looked smaller already. This was the home he'd bought with his late wife's life insurance money. The one thing he thought was absolutely safe. His destination was his brother's small condo in Glendale, 30 minutes away. 30 minutes to figure out how his retirement had collapsed in 10 minutes. The steering wheel felt slippery under his palms. His heart hammered against his ribs. One question repeated in his mind, louder than the engine noise. How did I become the villain in my own retirement? 4 years earlier, Tom had met Melissa at a grief support group in downtown Phoenix. Both had lost their spouses to long illnesses. Both knew what it meant to sleep in plastic hospital chairs for months. The church basement smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Folding chairs formed a circle under fluorescent lights. Tom attended because his doctor said isolation wasn't healthy for a man his age. Melissa sat 2 chairs away. 10 years younger, tired eyes, hands that never stopped moving. She worked medical billing during the day and waited tables at night to make ends meet. During the coffee break, she approached his chair. "You mentioned Sky Harbor Airport. My husband used to love watching planes take off." They talked for 20 minutes about sleeping on hospital recliners, about the strange guilt of laughing after a funeral. For the first time since Angela's service, Tom smiled without feeling like he was betraying someone's memory. Melissa had a 13-year-old son named Brandon. During their early dinner dates, the boy barely spoke. He kept his AirPods in and his eyes on his phone screen. Tom understood. Grief wrapped teenagers in silence sometimes. "He's still processing his dad's death," Melissa explained over Mexican food. "Give him time." Tom nodded. He remembered being 13 himself. How confusing the world felt when adults made decisions you couldn't control. Their courtship moved slowly. Coffee dates became dinner dates. Dinner dates became weekend trips to Sedona and Flagstaff. Tom felt something he'd forgotten existed: hope for companionship in his remaining years. 8 months later, he proposed in a small Mexican restaurant. Half-price margarita night. Nothing fancy, but Melissa cried anyway. "You're steady," she said, wiping her eyes. "You're safe. That's all I want after so much chaos." Tom promised he would never try to replace Brandon's father, only stand as another responsible adult in the boys' corner. He made extra contributions from his pension fund to help with school trips and orthodontist bills. The wedding was small, justice of the peace. Melissa wore a blue dress from department store. Brandon stood as witness, shifting from foot to foot in a borrowed tie. At first, blended family life seemed almost peaceful. Brandon stayed mostly in his room but accepted rides to school. He tolerated Tom's dad jokes at the dinner table. He never openly pushed back against reasonable bedtimes or homework expectations. Tom felt optimistic. Maybe this would work. Then small comments started creeping in, usually when Melissa was loading the dishwasher or taking a shower. Brandon would mention how young his mother looked, how she could do better if they ever moved to Los Angeles or Austin. "I mean, no offense," the boy would say, "but you guys are like from different generations." Melissa brushed it off with laughter. "Teenage teasing," she told Tom. "Totally normal." Tom forced himself to laugh along, but the words stuck under his skin like cactus spines. Sharp little reminders that he was the outsider in this new arrangement. Over time, Brandon developed a pattern. Whenever Tom set a boundary about curfew or chores, the boy would bring up his late father. "Dad would have let me stay out until midnight," he'd mutter, just loud enough for Melissa to hear from the kitchen. "Dad never made me take out trash on school nights." Dad understood that teenagers need space. Brandon was comparing Tom to a ghost, a man who never had to live with teenage attitude or enforce unpopular rules. A saint who existed only in memory. Melissa would shut it down at first. She reminded Brandon that Tom was good to them, that he paid the mortgage and health insurance premiums without complaint. But Tom caught something new in her eyes, a hesitation before she defended him. A micro-pause that hadn't been there during their courtship. "Maybe you could be a little more flexible," she suggested one evening after Brandon stormed off to his room. "He's still adjusting." Tom agreed to try harder, but the adjustments only seemed to go one direction. Brandon's adjustments involved more privileges and fewer responsibilities. Tom's adjustments involved walking on eggshells in his own home. Late at night, lying in bed beside Melissa, Tom wondered if he'd made a mistake. If love at 60 came with complications he hadn't anticipated. But then Melissa would curl against his shoulder and whisper about how grateful she felt, how safe their life together seemed compared to the chaos of single motherhood. Tom pushed his doubts aside. Every marriage required patience. Every step-family needed time to find its rhythm. He had no idea that patience would become his greatest weakness. The open conflict arrived on a hot June evening. Brandon sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. The screen showed a sleek silver Tesla Model S. "I need a car before senior year," he announced. Tom looked up from his evening newspaper. Melissa paused in the middle of loading the dishwasher. "We talked about this," Tom said carefully. "A reliable used car once you get a part-time job." Brandon's expression shifted. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed like Tom had just insulted his intelligence. "This isn't 1985, Tom. Kids at my school don't drive beat-up Toyotas." The price tag on the screen read $45,000. Tom's monthly pension was $3,000. Simple math told a clear story. "Son, on a fixed income, we need to be realistic about, I'm not your son." Brandon's voice cut through the kitchen air like a blade. Melissa turned from the sink. "Brandon, that's not how we talk to Tom." "Why not?" Brandon stood up from his chair. "He talks to me like I'm some welfare case, like we should be grateful for scraps." Tom kept his voice level. "I'm trying to explain our budget constraints. Maybe we could look at certified pre-owned vehicles in them." Brandon slammed his laptop shut. The sound echoed off the tile floor. "Forget it. Just forget everything." He stormed toward the hallway. His bedroom door slammed so hard a framed photo of Angela rattled on the living room shelf. Then came the sound Tom hadn't expected. Muffled sobbing from behind the bedroom door. Loud enough to carry down the hallway. Loud enough for Melissa to hear clearly. She dried her hands on a dish towel. Her face looked pale under the kitchen lights. "Maybe we should reconsider," she said quietly. Tom stared at her. "Reconsider a $45,000 car? He's been through so much loss. Maybe there's room in the budget for something special." That night, Melissa sat on the edge of their bed. Her back was rigid. She stared at the wall instead of looking at Tom. Was it really necessary to crush his dream like that? The question blindsided Tom. Suddenly, this wasn't about budgets or responsible spending. This was about grief and psychology and teenage emotional needs. "Melissa, we talked about this." The house renovations, your medical debt, the orthodontist bills. We're stretched thin already. She turned away from him. You don't understand what it's like to be his mother. To watch him lose everything and then feel like he can't even ask for anything. Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. We've given him everything he's needed. School supplies, sports equipment, spending money. Maybe you see it that way. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe you don't see how your tone affects him. After that conversation, Brandon's behavior shifted in a way that made Tom question his own perceptions. In front of Melissa, the boy became warm and engaging. He joked with Tom about baseball scores. He offered to help carry groceries. He asked thoughtful questions about Tom's work stories. But the moment Melissa left the room, Brandon's expression went completely blank, like someone had turned off a switch behind his eyes. Tom tried to invite him to work on an old motorcycle in the garage, a project they could share. Father and son bonding over tools and engine parts. Sure, Brandon said when Melissa was present. Then she went to the grocery store. Brandon followed Tom to the garage and stood there with his phone out. He answered every question with one word. Yeah, nope, whatever. When Melissa returned with shopping bags, Brandon suddenly perked up. Tom's teaching me about carburetors, Mom. It's really cool. Tom felt like he was losing his mind. Was he imagining the coldness? Was retirement loneliness making him paranoid about a grieving teenager? But the pattern repeated day after day. Warmth when Melissa was watching. Complete indifference when she wasn't. Late one Thursday night, Tom woke up to use the bathroom. Voices drifted from the hallway. Brandon's voice hushed but urgent. You don't see the way he looks at me when you leave, Mom. It makes me uncomfortable. Melissa's response was too soft to catch, but her tone sounded concerned, protective. Tom stood frozen in the bathroom doorway. His heart hammered against his ribs. What was Brandon telling her? The next morning, Melissa approached Tom while he was making coffee. Her expression was careful, measured. Brandon mentioned he sometimes feels uncomfortable around you. When I'm not home. Tom's hand stopped mid-scoop. Coffee grounds scattered across the counter. Uncomfortable how? He says you watch him differently. That your tone changes when it's just you two. Tom stared at his wife's face, searched for any sign that she doubted her son's story. Found none. Melissa, I've never done anything inappropriate. You know that. I do know that. But her voice carried a hesitation that hadn't been there before. I just think maybe you could be more aware of how you come across, more patient. For the first time in their marriage, Melissa was speaking to Tom like he might be the problem. Brandon appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hair was messy from sleep. His expression was perfectly innocent. Morning, Tom. Thanks for making coffee. He poured himself a glass of orange juice, kissed his mother's cheek, smiled at Tom like they were the best of friends. I was telling Mom how much I appreciated you helping with my science project yesterday. Tom hadn't helped with any science project, but Melissa beamed at both of them like this was proof of their improving relationship. Brandon caught Tom's confused expression and shrugged slightly. A tiny gesture that said, who's she going to believe? That afternoon, Tom sat in his garage workshop surrounded by tools he'd collected over 40 years. Everything felt familiar but wrong. Like his own life had become a puzzle with pieces that no longer fit together. He was 62 years old. He'd worked honest jobs his entire adult life. He'd never raised his voice at a child or made anyone feel unsafe. But somehow in his own home, he was becoming the villain in someone else's story. Tom pulled into his driveway after the VA clinic appointment. His blood work results were good. Cholesterol levels stable. Blood pressure under control. For a man his age, the doctor had said, he was doing fine. The front door stood slightly open. Strange for a Tuesday afternoon. Melissa's car was in the driveway, but she should have been at work. He found her sitting at the kitchen table. Her face was pale. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped a tissue. Brandon stood beside her chair. His left sleeve was rolled up to the elbow. We need to talk, Melissa said without looking up. Tom set his keys on the counter. The house felt different. Charged with electricity he couldn't identify. Brandon's forearm showed a dark purple bruise, the size of adult fingers, exactly where someone might grab a person's arm. Explain this. Melissa's voice cracked on the words. Tom stared at the bruise. His mind went completely blank. He'd seen similar marks on aircraft mechanics who'd been grabbed by rotating machinery. But this was his stepson's arm. I don't understand. You grabbed him, Melissa said. Hard enough to leave marks. The accusation hit Tom like a physical blow. Harder than any wrench to the skull. Harder than any fall from airplane scaffolding. I've never touched Brandon. Not once. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. He told me it's been going on for months. Tom looked at Brandon. The boy's expression was perfect. hurt but not angry, sad but not accusatory, like he was trying to protect Tom from his own mother's questions. Months, Tom's voice came out as a whisper. The little comments I mentioned, the way you look at him, now this. Melissa gestured at Brandon's arm. I can't ignore physical evidence. Tom reached toward her. She flinched backward like he was dangerous. That single movement shattered something permanent in Tom's chest. The assumption that his wife trusted him. Melissa, you know me. 4 years of marriage. Have you ever seen me violent? Ever seen me lose control? Brandon cleared his throat softly. It's okay, Mom. I don't want him to go to jail or anything. I just want him to get help. The words were perfectly calibrated. Merciful but concerned. Forgiving but firm. To anyone listening, Brandon sounded like a mature teenager trying to protect his family. To Tom, it sounded like a noose tightening around his neck. Help for what? Tom asked. Anger management, Melissa said. Counseling. Maybe medication to help with mood swings. I don't have mood swings. That's what Brandon means. Melissa wiped her nose with the tissue. You're like two different people. Sweet with me. Different with him when I'm not around. Tom felt the room spinning slightly. Everything he'd built over 4 years was collapsing in real time. His reputation, his marriage, his place in this house he'd renovated with his own hands. I need you to pack a bag, Melissa continued. Stay somewhere else while we figure this out. Maybe find a counselor. Definitely talk to a lawyer about how to handle this properly. A lawyer? For everyone's protection. Melissa's voice was barely audible. I've ignored too many warning signs. I can't risk Brandon's safety anymore. Tom looked around the kitchen. At the new cabinet handles he'd installed. At the fresh paint he'd applied last spring. At the coffee maker he'd bought for their first anniversary. This is my house, he said quietly. It's our house, Melissa corrected. And I'm asking you to leave it. Tom climbed the stairs to their bedroom. Each step felt like climbing toward his own execution. He pulled a suitcase from the closet and began folding clothes mechanically. Underwear, socks, work shirts, the blue button-down Melissa liked. Everything that defined his daily existence reduced to what fit in a canvas bag. Downstairs, he could hear muffled conversation. Melissa's voice, Brandon's voice, planning his exile. In the bathroom, Tom gathered his medications. Blood pressure pills, cholesterol medication, reading glasses. The small bottles rattled like dice in a cup. He thought about the morning routine he'd followed for 4 years. Coffee with Melissa before she left for work. Crossword puzzle at the kitchen table. Afternoon projects in the garage. All of it was ending because of a bruise he'd never made. Tom carried his suitcase downstairs. Melissa stood by the front door with her arms crossed. Brandon had disappeared. I'll call you in a few days, she said. Once I've had time to think. Think about what? Whether this marriage can be saved. Tom loaded his belongings into the Ford. His hands moved automatically, but his mind felt disconnected from his body, like watching someone else's life fall apart. As he backed out of the driveway, Melissa closed the front door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt like a final verdict. Tom drove toward Glendale in Tuesday afternoon traffic. His brother Mike lived in a small condo complex near the community college. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a fold-out sofa that would become Tom's bed for the foreseeable future. At 62, he was homeless. At Mike's place, Tom sat on the edge of the pull-out mattress. The springs creaked under his weight. Through the thin walls, he could hear neighbors talking and televisions playing. This wasn't retirement. This was exile. His phone stayed silent all evening. No calls from Melissa. No text messages asking if he was okay. No requests for explanation or conversation. The next morning, Tom called Melissa's work number. The receptionist said she was with a patient. He tried her cell phone. Straight to voicemail. Hi, it's me. I know you need space, but I thought we could talk. About what happened. About what comes next. Call me when you're ready. No response. He tried again Wednesday evening, Thursday morning, Friday afternoon. Every call went to voicemail. His messages grew shorter and more desperate. Just call me back. Please, Melissa. I need to understand what you think I did. Saturday morning, his phone buzzed with a text message. From Melissa, the first communication in a week. We need you to respect our space. Don't call until I'm ready to talk. Tom stared at the message for 20 minutes. 9 words that felt like a polite obituary for a still-breathing man. He was 62 years old. He'd worked honest jobs his entire adult life. He'd served his community and paid his taxes and never hurt anyone. But somehow, in the space of one Tuesday afternoon, he'd become a dangerous stranger who needed to be managed from a distance. Tom deleted the text message and turned off his phone. Outside Mike's window, Phoenix traffic hummed past in the desert heat. Life continued for everyone else while his had stopped completely. For the first time since Angela's funeral, Tom cried until his chest ached. But even through the tears, one thought burned clear and bright: this wasn't over. Someone had destroyed his life with a lie, and he was going to find out who and how and why, even if it took everything he had left. Tom lay awake on Mike's pull-out sofa. The springs creaked every time he shifted position. Through the thin walls came the sound of late-night television and traffic on the highway. His mind drifted back to a hospital room in Mesa, 3 years before he met Melissa. Angela's final night in hospice care. She had squeezed his hand with what little strength remained. Her voice was barely a whisper against the sound of oxygen machines. "Promise me something, Tom. Don't let this make you bitter. No matter how lonely retirement gets." Tom had nodded through his tears. "I promise." Angela smiled. "Find someone to laugh with again. You deserve that." Now, lying in darkness, Tom remembered the weight of that promise. How hard it had been to keep. After the funeral, their house felt like a museum. Every room displayed artifacts of a life that was over. Angela's coffee mug on the kitchen counter, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her shoes still paired neatly by the front door. Tom had spent his days fixing things that weren't broken, tightening screws that were already secure, organizing toolboxes that were already organized. Anything to avoid the silence that filled every corner. For 37 years, he'd worked maintenance at Sky Harbor Airport, crawling under aircraft in desert heat, working overtime shifts to build a small pension and pay off the mortgage early. Every bolt he tightened was an investment in their future together. He remembered coming home exhausted, coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and jet fuel. Angela would have dinner waiting. They'd sit at their small table and share the day's stories. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet rhythm of a solid marriage. After her death, those dinner conversations played in his memory like old radio programs. Her laugh echoing in the empty kitchen, her voice asking about his day at work. The loneliness became a physical weight, heavier than any aircraft engine he'd ever lifted. Meeting Melissa had felt like breaking the surface after nearly drowning. Her presence filled the silent rooms with sound and movement. Even Brandon's footsteps upstairs had been proof that the house was still alive. Tom recalled the first time Melissa cooked in his kitchen, the smell of garlic and onions, the sound of pans clattering, the sight of someone else's belongings mixed with his own. For the first time since the funeral, the house felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. He remembered teaching Brandon to change a tire in the driveway, the Arizona sun blazing overhead, the boy rolling his eyes but following instructions carefully. For one afternoon, they'd almost looked like a real father and son. Tom had felt hopeful, grateful, ready to build something new on the foundation of what he'd lost. The moment he added Melissa's name to his checking account, came back with painful clarity. Standing at the bank counter, signing papers that gave her equal access to money Angela's careful budgeting had saved. Trust means sharing everything, he told himself. The bank officer had asked if he wanted to maintain any separate accounts. Tom had shaken his head. Marriage meant partnership. Partnership meant transparency. Now he understood how naive that decision had been. Tom shifted on the uncomfortable mattress. His back ached from the uneven springs. His pride ached worse. The bitter irony wrapped around him like a blanket. Angela's dying wish was that he avoid bitterness. But kindness had made him vulnerable. Trust had made him a target. He thought about friends his age who'd warned against remarriage. Too risky after 60, they'd said. Blended families can turn on you. Protect what you've built. Tom had always believed love was worth the risk. That loyalty would be returned with loyalty. That treating people well meant being treated well in return. The hurt wasn't just about being thrown out of his house. It wasn't just about losing his savings or his marriage. It was about realizing that, in Melissa's heart, his 4 years of steady devotion weighed less than her son's 3 weeks of tears and manipulation. Everything Tom had believed about fairness and reciprocity was crumbling. The values that had guided him through decades of honest work meant nothing when faced with calculated deception. He'd lost more than a house or a wife. He'd lost the version of himself who believed that doing right guaranteed being treated right. In the darkness of his brother's living room, Tom felt something harder than bitterness taking root. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more determined. He thought about Angela's final request, about promises made in hospital rooms, about the kind of man she'd married and the kind of man she'd wanted him to remain. But Angela had never faced false accusations. She'd never been manipulated by a teenager who saw kindness as weakness. She'd never watched trust turn into a weapon pointed at her own heart. Tom closed his eyes and made a different kind of promise. To himself this time, he would not go quietly into exile. He would not accept blame for crimes he hadn't committed. And he would not let a 17-year-old con artist destroy what he'd spent a lifetime building. The pull-out sofa creaked as Tom finally found a position that didn't hurt his back. Outside, the desert wind rattled Mike's windows. For the first time in a week, Tom felt something other than confusion and despair. He felt like he was waking up. Mike insisted on driving Tom to the lawyer's office. "You need professional help," his brother said over breakfast coffee. "This isn't something you handle alone." The law firm sat in a glass building in downtown Phoenix. Modern furniture, abstract art on the walls. The kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't waste time on small talk. Carla Nguyen was a sharp woman in her 50s. Silver hair pulled back, expensive suit. She listened to Tom's story without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across a yellow legal pad. When he finished, she asked one question. "Whose name is on the deed?" Tom explained the house was in his name only. Purchased with life insurance money years before he met Melissa, fully paid off before their wedding. Carla nodded slowly. Someone willing to throw you out based on unproven allegations might already be planning her financial exit strategy. The words hit Tom like cold water. He hadn't considered that Melissa's anger might be calculated rather than emotional. "What do you recommend?" "File for divorce first. If you want any control over this situation, you need to move before she does." Carla's assistant brought in forms and documents. Tom's signature fell heavy on each page. After 4 years of marriage, it took 20 minutes to start the legal process of ending it. "I'm also recommending a private investigator," Carla said. "Someone to look into your finances. And if possible, the boy's online activity." Tom felt sick about investigating his own family. But Carla's expression was firm. "Trust is a luxury you can't afford anymore." The investigator's name was Ray Martinez, a retired Phoenix police detective who specialized in domestic cases. His office was smaller than Carla's, but somehow more reassuring. Photos of grown children on his desk. A coffee-stained map of Arizona on the wall. Ray looked like someone who'd seen every kind of lie humans could tell. "I'll start with the easy stuff," Ray said. "Bank records. Credit reports. Then we'll see about social media." Tom signed another set of papers authorizing Ray to access their joint accounts. His hands shook slightly as he wrote his name. 3 days later, Ray called with preliminary findings. "Your joint account shows some interesting patterns. Large withdrawals over the last 6 months. Gaming equipment, designer clothes, food delivery charges, all attributed to Brandon." Tom met Ray at a Denny's near the airport. The investigator spread bank statements across the sticky table like evidence in a courtroom. "Here's where it gets worse," Ray continued. "Melissa opened a new credit card in her name only. Maxed it out in 3 weeks. Same pattern of purchases." The numbers made Tom's stomach turn. Thousands of dollars he'd never authorized. Money Angela had saved through careful budgeting, now spent on teenager luxuries. But here's the really interesting part. Ray pulled out another set of papers. "She's been moving money from your savings account to cover the credit card minimums. Small amounts, hoping you wouldn't notice." Tom stared at the evidence of financial betrayal. His retirement savings slowly drained to fund Brandon's lifestyle and cover Melissa's spending. "There's more," Ray said. "I legally obtained access to some of Brandon's cloud storage. What I found is going to shock you." Ray unlocked his tablet and opened a folder of screenshots. Social media conversations between Brandon and his friends. Tom read the first message and felt his blood pressure spike. "Mom's finally seeing through the old guy act. Once she sells his house, we're out of this boring retirement town." Another message dated 2 weeks earlier. "Phase 2 starts tomorrow. The bruise needs to look real." A third message, sent the day after Tom left, worked perfectly. "He's gone and she believes every word." Ray scrolled to a video file. "This is the one that's going to win your case." The video showed Brandon in the bathroom. He was slamming his own forearm against the edge of the sink. Again and again. His face was concentrated, calculating. "This bruise better look real," Brandon muttered to himself on the recording. Tom watched his stepson create the evidence that had destroyed his marriage. The boy practiced different facial expressions in the mirror. Sad, hurt, afraid, like an actor rehearsing for an audition. The video timestamp showed it was recorded the morning before Tom's confrontation with Melissa. Tom pushed the tablet away. His hands were shaking. How long had he been planning this? Ray showed him more messages, dating back months. Brandon had been strategically planting doubts about Tom's character, building a narrative of inappropriate behavior and mood swings. "He's smart," Ray admitted. "Never wrote anything that was outright false. Just implications." Suggestions. Let his mother's imagination fill in the gaps. Tom read message after message. Brandon describing how uncomfortable he felt around Tom. How his stepfather seemed different when they were alone. How he was afraid to tell mom because he didn't want to cause drama. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Every word calculated to build suspicion without making specific accusations. Until the fake bruise provided the physical evidence Melissa needed to act. There's one more thing, Ray said. I found evidence that Brandon's been researching Arizona property law. How to claim abandonment. How to establish residence for someone without ownership. Tom felt something cold settle in his chest. He was planning to steal my house. That's my assessment. Get your wife to believe you're dangerous. Force you to leave. Establish a pattern of abandonment. Then use that to claim partial ownership through marriage and residency. Ray closed the tablet and gathered the papers. The good news is we have everything we need. The bad news is your wife has been completely manipulated by a teenage sociopath. Tom sat in the Denny's parking lot after Ray left. The desert sun heated the interior of his Ford until the steering wheel was too hot to touch. For weeks, he'd blamed himself. Wondered if he'd somehow misunderstood Brandon's signals. If his own loneliness had made him paranoid about normal teenage behavior. Now he knew the truth. Every moment of confusion and self-doubt had been orchestrated. Brandon had studied him like a mechanic studies an engine, looking for weak points, testing for vulnerabilities. Tom's greatest weakness had been his kindness, his willingness to give Brandon the benefit of the doubt, his desire to be a good stepfather even when treated with disrespect. The boy had turned those qualities into weapons. Tom started the engine and drove back toward Glendale. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair. He felt like himself again, clear-headed, determined. Brandon had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the man he was trying to destroy. Tom Grady had spent 40 years fixing complex machinery, solving problems that stumped younger mechanics, figuring out why things broke and how to make them work again. Now he had a different kind of problem to solve, and all the evidence he needed to fix what Brandon had broken. Carla filed the divorce papers on Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Melissa sent her first text message in 2 weeks. Have you thought about your behavior? Brandon might forgive you if you apologize. Tom stared at the message for 10 minutes. The same manipulation tactics Brandon had used now coming from his mother. Appeal to guilt. Demand submission. Offer false mercy. He typed a simple reply. Meet me tomorrow. Drippy. Memory. Peoria Starbucks. Tom spent Wednesday evening at Mike's kitchen table, organizing documents, screenshots of Brandon's messages, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, the bathroom video queued up on his phone. Everything fit into a manila folder. 4 years of marriage reduced to evidence of deception. Thursday afternoon, Tom arrived at the coffee shop early. He chose a table near the back, away from the barista counter but visible to other customers. Witnesses might matter. The folder sat in front of him like a bomb waiting to detonate. Melissa arrived exactly on time. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Her work clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them, but she still wore the blue blouse he'd bought her for Christmas. She approached his table with a hopeful smile, cautious but optimistic. Tom, I'm glad you called. She sat down without ordering coffee. I've been thinking about us, about how to fix this. Tom didn't respond. He slid the folder across the table. Melissa opened it and found the divorce petition first. Her face went paper white. Her hands started trembling. Tom, we can work this out. Brandon and I talked, and he's willing to forgive. Keep reading. Page by page, Melissa discovered the unauthorized spending. Brandon's gaming equipment purchases. Her own credit card debt. The pattern of financial theft that had been bleeding Tom's savings for months. Her breathing became shallow. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't know about these charges. Brandon said you'd approved. Keep reading. The next pages contain screenshots of Brandon's text messages. His plans to push the old man out. His excitement about selling the house. His detailed manipulation strategy spread across months of conversations. Melissa's mascara began to run. Black tears streaked down her cheeks. He was just venting to friends. Teenagers say things they don't mean. Last page, Tom said. Tom unlocked his phone and placed it on the table. The bathroom video filled the screen. Brandon's voice echoed softly between the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of other customers. They watched Brandon slam his own arm against the sink edge, again and again, practicing his facial expressions in the mirror, rehearsing his performance for maximum effect. This bruise better look real, Brandon muttered to his reflection. Melissa's hands shook as she covered her mouth. The coffee shop suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too public for this kind of revelation. He told me you grabbed him, she whispered. He was sobbing in my arms. I believed him. Tom's voice came out flat and emotionless. I begged you to ask questions. You didn't want to hear anything that contradicted his story. Melissa stared at the phone screen, at the evidence of her son's calculated cruelty, at the proof that she'd destroyed her marriage based on a lie. What kind of mother does this make me? Before Tom could answer, the coffee shop door banged open. Brandon walked in with the confidence of someone who expected to control the situation. He'd clearly been waiting in the parking lot, watching through the windows, planning his entrance for maximum dramatic effect. But when Brandon saw the papers spread across the table and the look on his mother's face, his expression shifted. The mask he'd worn for months finally slipped. What did you tell her? Brandon demanded. A dozen customers turned to look. Phones appeared in hands around the coffee shop. Teenagers automatically recording any confrontation that might go viral. I showed her the truth, Tom said calmly. Brandon grabbed the phone and saw his own face on the screen. Watched himself creating the bruise that had expelled Tom from his own house. You had no right to spy on me. I had every right to defend myself against your lies. Brandon's voice rose higher, more desperate. The careful manipulation replaced by panic. He was ruining our lives, Mom. He was boring and old, and he was keeping us stuck in this retirement town forever. The raw selfishness in Brandon's words cut through the coffee shop air like a knife. Other customers stopped pretending not to listen. A teenage barista paused in the middle of making a latte. Once his house was gone, we could move somewhere fun. Los Angeles, Austin, somewhere with actual life instead of old people and golf courses. Melissa stared at her son like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The manipulation, the lies, the complete absence of remorse or empathy. You destroyed my marriage for real estate? It wasn't even a real marriage, Brandon shot back. You settled for some old airplane mechanic because you were scared to be alone. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Irreversible, poisonous, true enough to wound but cruel enough to end everything. Melissa stood up from the table. Her chair scraped against the tile floor. Her voice was barely audible when she spoke. Get out. Mom, you don't understand. Get out of this coffee shop. Get out of Tom's house. Get out of my life. Brandon looked around the room at the dozen phones pointed in his direction, at the faces of strangers who'd witnessed his complete emotional breakdown, at the mother who'd finally stopped believing his lies. For the first time in months, Brandon had no response. No manipulation. No carefully crafted explanation. He turned and walked out of the Starbucks. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Melissa sat back down. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the table for a long moment. I don't know how to apologize for this, she said finally. Tom gathered the papers and put them back in the folder. Apologies don't undo 4 months of false accusations. I know. Melissa wiped her eyes with a napkin. I know you'll never forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. Tom stood up from his chair. The conversation was over. The marriage was over. But for the first time in months, he felt like himself again. The house is mine, he said. You and Brandon have 60 days to find somewhere else to live. Melissa nodded without arguing. She understood the consequences of her choices. The price of believing lies over truth. Tom walked out of the Starbucks and into the Phoenix afternoon heat. Behind him, Melissa sat alone at the table with the evidence of her son's betrayal spread out like cards from a losing poker hand. In his Ford, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced since the morning he'd been thrown out of his own house. He felt free. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, finalized faster than Carla had predicted. The court recognized the house as Tom's premarital property and noted Melissa's participation in unauthorized financial activity. 60 days. That's all the time Melissa and Brandon were given to find somewhere else to live. Tom drove past the house on moving day. A rented U-Haul sat in the driveway. Brandon tossed boxes carelessly into the truck bed, while Melissa carefully taped the last cardboard containers. The October sun made everything look sharp and clean. No forgiveness in the desert light. Tom didn't stop. Didn't roll down his window. Didn't offer help or attempt conversation. Boundaries weren't cruelty. They were survival, especially after 60. He kept driving toward the Home Depot where he'd volunteered to help an elderly neighbor install new faucets. Hands steady on the steering wheel, eyes focused on the road ahead. Weeks later, Tom heard through mutual acquaintances that Melissa and Brandon were sharing a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the far side of Phoenix. The boy resented his mother for messing up the plan. The same manipulation he'd aimed at Tom was now turned against her. Their relationship was deteriorating as quickly as it had once seemed perfect. Tom felt a complicated mix of sadness and relief. He still remembered Melissa's laugh filling his quiet kitchen, Brandon's brief, almost genuine smile during their tire-changing lesson years before, but memory no longer overruled reality. Nostalgia no longer excused betrayal. To keep from sinking into bitterness, Tom started volunteering at a nonprofit auto workshop in Central Phoenix. The organization fixed cars for low-income seniors who couldn't afford commercial repair shops. Turning wrenches for people his own age felt more meaningful than any luxury purchase ever could have. Every oil change and brake replacement helped someone maintain independence and dignity. An 80-year-old woman named Clara brought in her 1998 Honda Civic every few months. She'd driven the same car for 25 years, but could no longer afford dealership service. "You're keeping me mobile," she told Tom after he replaced her worn brake pads. Mobile means free. Tom understood exactly what she meant. He also joined a men's group at the community center near his house. 8 retired guys who met Wednesday evenings in a circle of folding chairs. Coffee from a percolator and stories about second marriages, difficult adult children, and boundaries they wish they'd drawn earlier. For the first time since his exile began, Tom didn't feel like the only person blindsided by family manipulation. "My daughter cleaned out my savings," said Frank, a retired teacher. "Told me it was for my grandson's college fund. Turned out to be for her boyfriend's gambling debts. My stepson convinced his mother I was developing dementia," added Robert, a former construction foreman. "Had me tested 3 times before she realized he wanted power of attorney over my pension." The stories were different, but the pattern was identical. Older men targeted for their assets, trust weaponized against them, kindness mistaken for weakness. Tom shared his own experience without shame or embarrassment. The fake bruise, the financial theft, the systematic campaign to destroy his reputation and steal his home. Nobody questioned his judgment or suggested he should have seen the warning signs. They understood how skilled manipulation could fool anyone. At night, Tom's house felt different than it had during the lonely years after Angela's death. Silence no longer felt like punishment or abandonment. It felt like peace. He could hear the desert wind through the windows, the gentle hum of his refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock Angela had bought at a yard sale 30 years ago. Most importantly, he could hear his own breathing, steady and calm and unhurried. Sometimes he thought about Melissa, wondered if she'd ever truly understand how early Brandon's poison had started, whether she'd recognize the signs if someone tried to manipulate her again. But he no longer built his daily routine around the possibility of her realization or apology. Tom had learned to live his own life for his own reasons. On weekends, he worked in the small garden behind his house. Tomatoes and peppers that thrived in the desert climate. Simple plants that rewarded consistent care with reliable harvest. The routine reminded him of the maintenance work that had filled his career. Problems had solutions if you approached them methodically. Systems worked properly when tended with patience and skill. The same principles applied to rebuilding a life after betrayal. One Saturday morning, Tom sat on his back patio with coffee and the newspaper. The desert air was crisp and clean. His small garden showed the first signs of winter vegetables sprouting. A text message arrived from an unknown number. "Melissa's new phone. I know you'll probably delete this, but I needed to say I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I should have asked questions. I hope you're okay." Tom read the message twice, felt a small flutter of the old affection, the memory of shared dinners and quiet conversations. Then he deleted it without responding. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Some trust couldn't be restored. Some mistakes had consequences that lasted forever. But that didn't make him bitter. It made him wise. Tom finished his coffee and walked back into his house. The same rooms where he'd once felt like an outsider now welcomed him like an old friend. In the kitchen, he started preparing lunch for one person. Simple sandwich. Glass of milk. No need to negotiate preferences or accommodate complaints. The freedom felt better than any companionship built on lies. Tom's final lesson was hard-earned but valuable love without questions isn't trust, it's denial. And denial was the most dangerous roommate any aging person could have. He'd rather live alone with truth than surrounded by beautiful deceptions. At 62, Tom Grady was exactly where he belonged. In his own home, living by his own rules, trusting people who'd earned it rather than demanding it. The afternoon sun streamed through his kitchen windows. His shadow fell across the table where he'd once felt like a stranger in his own house. Now it looked like the shadow of a man who knew his own worth.